Welcome to La Verdad Duele. What is that? The truth that hurts. Even though we're not intending to hurt anybody's feelings, we know that we may share information that many people have strong opinions on. This is solely based on the fact that we love sharing information and we love passing down knowledge. And this podcast is all about that. And we hope you can enjoy that. Let's get to it. Puyaka. My name is Tijani Musa, and on today's podcast, I have invited very interesting presenter or speaker who's going to educate us on just about anything and everything that you need when you're about to start a family, or anything that you need if you are from a female perspective, anything that you need about your body, and from a male perspective, anything that you need to start a family and also become good at what you do, and that is becoming a good father or just becoming a good parent. And so without talking too much about the conversation, I'm going to introduce the guest for the podcast on this episode. And the guest is Miss Carmen Mojica. Carmen Mojica is an Afro-Dominicana born and raised in the Bronx. She is a certified professional midwife, writer, and reproductive justice activist with a particular focus on birth justice. The focus of her work is on the empowerment of women and people of the African diaspora, specifically discussing the Afro-Latina identity. She utilizes her experience as a midwife to raise awareness on maternal and infant health for women, highlighting the disparities in the healthcare system in the United States for women of color. Ms. Mojica, welcome to La Verdad Duele.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm excited to come and speak to you about this subject. I've never really gotten the opportunity to talk to fathers, so this is particularly exciting for me. So without further disclaimers or anything, I'm just going to hop right into it. So I think when we think about the subject of pregnancy and becoming a parent, many of us just, go ahead, have children, whoever we marry, whoever we're with, and then figure it out as we go along. Like, we don't get told, and nor do many of us have the opportunity to think about what it is how it is we want to prepare. And that's not to be confused with like being ready, because there's no getting ready to go through being a parent. Like nothing will make you ready. And there are also tools that can be put into place, and like circumstances that can be put into place to at least have everything that you could need to be a successful parent who's breaking intergenerational cycles as successful as possible. So me personally, I actually began to prepare to become a mother 10 years before I gave birth. I realized that was something that I wanted to do, and my main reason was because I wanted to be as healthy as possible before I did. But as that time went on, healthy meant more than just eating right and getting exercise. And so this is just as much applies to men as it does to women, that there are things and like areas of life that can be looked at and assessed to see if you are happy with it being where it is if a child were to enter your life. So things that I'm going to cover is like identifying areas in your life that you may want to give attention to in preparing to become a parent, and just general wellness tips, nothing too in depth because everybody is different, that can support mental and physical optimal well-being. So preconception planning is important because it helps you to establish a baseline, to understand what's your medical history, how you're taking inventory of how your body's doing, what your life is habits and normal terms of being, your lifestyle. And all baseline also includes what are called like the normal vital signs of the body, like your blood pressure, major organs, et cetera, et cetera. For a woman who may be a man's partner, that can also include the well-being of her reproductive system, but also, and this is a part that like we don't highlight very much, also like the well-being of a man's reproductive system, right? So often infertility is put on it's the woman. There's something wrong with her eggs. There's something wrong with her. When really sometimes it can be like the health of the sperm and the health of the man. right, can also play a part in why conception is not happening. Preconception planning is also important because it helps you to plan things ahead of time. And the things that I specifically mean that you can plan ahead of time are like establishing relationships with like mental health professionals, if that's something that you need. Having a good grasp of your financial picture, both currently and what you would like to see. Like, and doing research, the massive amount of research that people often feel like they have to take on in 9 months, you can start that even before, right? Like, and not just pregnancy, but like if you're interested in researching fatherhood or researching motherhood or like knowing more about what you're doing. Like, I find it strange sometimes that we do more research about what kind of phone we're going to buy or what kind of car we're going to buy than we do about bringing children into the world. It's true, right? Like you will go and ask people like, should I get an iPhone or a Galaxy and why? And like, what are the specs, right? Or you go to buy a car, you sit down with the dealer and you ask everything you could possibly ask about the car, right? But we don't take that special attention to preconception planning, not because there's something wrong with us, but because we just, as a culture, don't necessarily give that an importance, right? Building support, right? So like whatever that support looks like, whether it be like strengthening relationships and families with friends that you would want to be part of that, your journey as a parent, or other support systems, whether it's daycare, babysitting, like not that you can be like, oh, you're going to be my babysitter for a child that may happen 5-10 years from now, but at least learning what the type of support you might need. And last, this is actually for me, like the most important one, you could have like the car, the apartment, even the perfect relationship, but breaking intergenerational cycles, especially as Black and Indigenous descendant peoples, is probably for me the most important thing that we could do, that we could provide. Many of us are first generation children of immigrants who came here for a better life. And many of us may be part of families that are here in the United States for a couple of generations, but are the first generation to go to college and stuff like that, right? And some of us may not be in that category. There is a high chance that you might be the first in your line to think deeply about what kind of parent you want to be and what you do and don't want to pass on to your children. So breaking intergenerational cycles of violence, abuse in all forms, being ashamed of your body and sexuality, and so many things our family histories have, is the path forward for us. Preconception is a time to reflect on that and what we want to transform for ourselves and for our children. And so I'm going to actually dive right into like the different areas, but I'm going to say a little more about intergenerational trauma. I could have a whole conversation just on intergenerational trauma, but I want to touch on it, right? When we're thinking about becoming parents, a common thing that comes up is our own upbringing and how we were parented, right? And especially for men, like men and their fathers have a different dynamic going on than like men and their mothers, right? And like women and their mothers and women and their fathers, right? There's a lot of healing and things that we have learned, and maybe like things that happen with our fathers and our mothers that we are either heard about or acknowledging that like that didn't work and this caused me to be this way and I don't want to pass that on. So outside of the immediate family and extended family, like the trauma of like the stealing of the lands from indigenous people, the kidnapping of Africans from the continent and brought over to the Western Hemisphere, colonization, all of these things also add to the trauma that we experience, because as we are being assaulted by colonialism, we play that out in our families, right? And so many of us are aware of this when we're seeing our communities and we're like, looking at our families and being like, even if you don't have a high level of like, education, that's not a marker of being able to be cognizant that these are things that are going on in our families. Even if we don't know how to express it that way, right? We can see it. But one thing that I want to say, and then I'll move on, is that we don't often mention intergenerational resilience, right? So for all the ways that, particularly men, and this is me speaking to the men who are listening, for all the ways that we know that men could know that, like, there's machismo and like patriarchy, and that like they saw some things that their fathers and uncles did and grandfathers did that they didn't agree with, and all the ways that we could be, a man could be dysfunctional in the world. We're also resilient and strong people, right? Through many times being strong is not an option, and we have to be strong, we do carry the strength of our ancestors who resisted death and destruction for us to be here, right? And so I think that that's also important, right? Like knowing that we have this trauma, but also knowing that we have the strength that's been passed on through our family lines to confront not just this trauma, but to like like make sure that we're breaking that up to teach our children resilience in a world that's going to traumatize them, and what that means not just for the mother, but what that means as a father guiding another human being. So I call this particular part like assessing your life, like a life assessment, right? We don't often get the chance to learn how to organize ourselves. And I mean, some of us are super organized and we have lists for everything. Everything's color coordinated, whatever. But organizing your mind and like your world is not the same, right? You could be very organized on paper, but you could be completely disorganized within. And there are different like versions of this. Some people call this the wheel of life. But what's really important are the categories that give you like a map to, or like kind of like it gives you some structure to get a baseline about what's going on in your life and where there's room for improvement or where you think everything's going just fine. So there are, what I want to just touch on is that there's 6 main areas of our life, right? There's health and wellness, which refers to your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual state. Like, you know, considering how the person feels in their body, do they feel whole? Are they tired? Do they feel well rested? Like, are they getting enough physical activity? Like, do you feel content or are you depressed, right? So that's just like, there's no right or wrong, just like assessing like, oh, this is how I feel in regards to health and fitness in my life, right? The second area is family and relationships. So platonic and romantic. And this area includes significant others, immediate family, close friends. And like assessing how satisfied you are with those relationships and thinking about how you communicate, support each other, and enjoy life together, right? The third area is recreation and fun. And thinking about this includes like hobbies, recreation, like things that you do to bring value and satisfaction to your life. And some of the questions that you could pose yourself are like, do you have hobbies that bring you joy and give you something to look forward to? Do those hobbies connect you to like-minded people where you could build and like, you know, expand your mind, so to speak, and like have new ideas and inspirations? Are you enjoying your life and making it fun, right? Like, and I think that's a super important question, especially as like you're assessing just for yourself, right? Like, am I enjoying my life? And if I'm not, like, do I want to be, which I would hope the answer is yes. And what do I need to do to bring my level of satisfaction up to feeling like I'm enjoying and having some fun in life. Mm-hmm. The fourth area is being spiritual and connectedness. And spirituality not meaning like subscribing to a religion, but spirituality is actually like the sense of connectedness that you have between your body, your mind, your spirit, nature, and other people. So that's really like how you make sense of that connectivity or lack thereof, right? Some people call it God, some people call it the universe, like whatever that is, like just assessing like how do you feel connected to yourself and those around you and your spirit, right? Like, and whatever that means for you from whatever culture you have. I think that we shy away from talking about spirituality because most of us think that we're thinking about religion, but spirit isn't everything. Even the person that's the least religious, at least even like for me, an example, like being in the Bronx, they may not be a religious person, but they will say if they get in a bad vibe off of somebody, right? Or like that don't feel right. Or have experienced that like parties in their culture happen when it feels right and not necessarily at a time, right? So like, especially I think Black and Indigenous people and by extension Latino and other people of color, like we are inherently spiritual people. Listen to our music, right? Like our food, the way that we connect, that's spirit. It doesn't have anything connected to religion necessarily, right? But like there's a reason that you can feel the way you feel when you listen to drums or like you listen to hip hop, rap, R&B. Like we are a soulful people, right? And so to deny ourselves that connection, you know, could mean that we don't feel as connected to our sense of self as we would want to be, especially as we're thinking about being a parent. So the last 2 areas is finances. And this is beyond how much you're saving. So it also means how you feel and you respond to money. Like, how do you feel when you're like, when like you don't have a lot of money and like money's tight? Like, do you feel positive or negative about money? And like, how does your income align with like your strengths and your passions? And like, how happy are you with your ability to budget? And like, does your financial situation make you feel free or do you feel tense around it, right? And of course, you can also include like what you're doing to save money and all of those like practical, logical pieces. But like really, like how do you feel about money when you have it in abundance and then you don't, right? Because we ebb and flow with that our whole lives. And the last area of organization is career and your contribution. And contribution meaning like, what do you feel like you're contributing to the world? And that doesn't mean that you're going to go and change the world, right? None of us can do that. But we can contribute to like the lives of people around us, right? And to our families and to like our workplaces, right? So this particular area is like considering how you use your gifts and your talents to serve others. Right. How do you feel? Like thinking about how do you feel on Sunday before work starts? Like, are you dreadful or like anxious? Or are you excited? Or like, do you find like you can actually look forward to your job, even if like, work is work? But do you feel like, oh, I got to go to this place, or like I'm tired and I wish I didn't have to work so many hours, but I generally feel good where I work. Like I feel like my humanity is acknowledged, and like I actually love what I'm actually get to do day to day, even if it's frustrating sometimes, right? And then like, for folks that are interested in thinking about, what is it that you do on a weekly basis that makes you feel like you're creating positive change in the world, right? Like even if you don't intend to be a leader in the world, if you're thinking about having children, you have noticed that the world is not in the best place that I could potentially be in, right? And so how are you adding to create positivity for that person, right? So those are 6 areas. Some people, they like actually Google like Wheel of Life, and they can like download and print this out and actually work on it. And that there's no pressure. Like I want to say that to like have your life together. But this is really like I really done in the spirit of like taking inventory for yourself and deciding if there's things that you feel like you want to organize or work on before you have a child. That's one organizing tool that I feel is important for whether or not you're the mother or you're the father, to like really like feel like you have a good grasp on like where you are in your life. So I want to touch on healthcare, because a lot of the times this is put in like the mother's court. She's the one that figures out where she's going to give birth or whatnot. Sometimes there are sometimes and oftentimes that the father does give an opinion about how they feel about the decision. But I think men don't always have the opportunity to be educated about what are the options, right? And then a lot of men aren't able to, or have not made it a priority to also get themselves checked every single year, right? And having a relationship with their healthcare provider, right? So this is that first point, is that just as much as a woman and the mother has to go get checked or like make sure that she's getting her annual exam and whatnot, the partner, the man or male identifying person, should also be getting themselves checked out, right? Because how much would it, not be awesome that you find out that because of carelessness and not checking on yourself, you have some type of condition that could have been taken care of, right? So that won't allow you to like enjoy whatever future children that you have, right? Or just generally just being in health, right? And feeling good so that you can help make your family feel good. But I do want to call attention to some of the care and options that women have, so that when your partner, mother of your child or wife or whoever it is that you decide to create a child with, is thinking about these things, men can also have some type of like a starting point, right? So the ones that are the primary sources of reproductive and maternal health care tend to be midwives and OB-GYNs, obstetricians, gynecologists. So midwifery and midwives are one of the oldest professions that we could record in human history. Midwives tend to be able to provide reproductive and gynecological services, but many of us know them to specialize in childbirth. An obstetrician is a trained surgeon that deals with childbirth, and gynecology is just reproductive health and women's health. Most people are more familiar with that because they're surgeons, so they're doctors, and midwives are not doctors. They are healthcare professionals that specialize in birth. Some midwives, depending on which midwife it is that you have, do also do some of the gynecological stuff. But for the most part, we're focused on birth. So the main difference, right, is that one main difference is that a midwife and an OB, which is an OBGYN obstetrician, they're going to approach the care and how they view the your partner's body differently. And this is not to say that all midwives are one way and all obstetricians are another way, but this is how they're trained, right? So midwives, they're experts at normal physiological birth. And what I mean by that is birth that happens naturally on its own with little to no interventions. Interventions being medications and like procedures and things of that nature. Midwifery care is often very nurturing. It's hands-on during, before, and after the birth. And all midwives usually base their care on the fact that pregnancy and birth are normal events. So they're going to treat this not as an emergency, but they're going to treat this as a big life event. And the visits tend to be longer than 15 minutes. And they don't just take the vitals, but they also are monitoring the emotional and the mental health as well. Some people decide they want to give birth in a hospital with a hospital-based midwife. Some people decide that they want to give birth at home with a midwife. And some people decide that they want to give birth at a birthing center. And all those options, not one of them is safer than the other. The only thing I will say is that a hospital could be safer depending on the woman, the mother's health, and her comfort level. And a lot of us have learned that like home birth and like birth with midwives is dangerous. And that's because we've been intentionally taught to look at things that way. But really they're both trained professionals that are experts at this. And it's really about your comfortability. OB-GYN, but the OB obstetrician part, they are trained surgeons, right? So they can perform surgical procedures, which means that they are not necessarily, unless they themselves have worked on this, they're not trained in normal, undisturbed, unmedicated, low intervention birth. So the birth might be a little more medical, depending on the OB-GYN. And it's based on diagnosing and relying on medical technologies. And usually OB visits tend to be shorter. They're about the 15 minutes. So those are the options that usually are available. So I think that it's important for like anyone who has a vested interest in helping to investigate where they feel comfortable, really think about what kind of care resonates with you and your family. I think it's the best guidance that I can give. In terms of health and wellness, I don't unfortunately don't have a lot of recommendations for men's health because that's not my area of expertise. But what I can say is that having a good diet is important, meaning green, dark leafy greens, vegetables, fruits, like going easy on alcohol and fast food, because that can affect the health of sperm and just your health in general. Knowing your family history, like usually we have to know that for the doctor, but knowing your own family history can be important for the health of the future family, right? Conditions in your family could adversely affect your children. So knowing this information in the preconception period, both you and your partner, could be really important, right? Because there's some genetics in certain families that can produce, different neurological differences in a child, or knowing that there's diabetes that runs in your family. That would be something good to know, to be able to pass on to that child so that they know that that's part of family history that they need to know and to watch for. And sometimes with the information that you share, the doctor may actually refer you for genetic counseling, right? So that's why it's important for just as much as the mother to know that history, for the father to also know. Getting mentally well. So men, especially Black and Indigenous and Latino men, don't tend to talk about their emotions and their mental health. And I'm telling you now, to be as successful as a father as you want to be, I invite you to peel back that stigma and really think about mental and emotional health, especially if you plan to be hope to be a father to a little boy or a little girl. How are you modeling what manhood and whatever that means for you and whatever society says that it is for that person? And part of that is being able to be cognizant of being worried, stressed, and anxious. And that could also, shut you down and not let you enjoy parenthood as much as you would like to. Some other recommendations would be sometimes men tend to work in environments that might have toxins in the air, right? You might be in construction or dealing with asbestos or Any variety. That's the only thing that came to mind. But any variety of things that are toxic that could also have effect on the health of the man's reproductive health. Smoking cigarettes. I know that might be something hard to quit for folks, but I think thinking about it in that, like, if you continue to smoke, and not around the child when you have the child, but even just secondhand smoke, right? I know that, like, if there's a smoker in the house, like, the smoker shouldn't sleep like facing the child or close to the child, because as they're sleeping, that's coming out of their body through their breath, right? So something important to think about is that habit in particular. So, I mean, other than that, that's really like the basics of what I can say for fatherhood. Again, like, I identify as a woman and I'm a mother, so I can only speak from my perspective. But I think that there is a great deal of opportunity to really, create the types of families and fathers that we want by giving this some thought, and also being as supportive as possible by being engaged and involved in the process of cultivating child and also cultivating your partner. That's the relationship that you have with them. And I think that I can end it right there. And we could talk a little more about any questions that came up or anything else in my presentation.
All right. So first of all, the information is great, but I want to get to know you more, because I went to college here and I think I consider myself very popular, and I know a lot of people, but I haven't met that many people that are saying that, oh, I'm studying to become a midwife. How did you come to that? How did you figure that you want to become a midwife?
So thank you for asking that. So I had always had an interest in like health sciences, like the health field as a child. And then as I got older, kind of just felt discouraged from doing it. Just didn't think I could do it until I got to college. And I really started to think about, like, I have an interest in reproductive health and teaching other Black and Latina and Indigenous people about, how to take care of ourselves. And so as I started to explore that, I learned about midwifery. And for me, that being a midwife felt more in tune with who I am. And so I decided to become a midwife in 2012, and I went to school to 2013. I got my certification in 2017. And I think becoming a midwife came out of the fact that I've always been like holistically inclined. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to combine educating women about their bodies with this, love that I had for not just healthcare, but like women's healthcare specifically. As I was younger, sometimes we forget what we want to do when we're younger, and not all of us come back to it. But I was given the opportunity to come back to it as I thought.
Right. So we talked about a lot of things already, and also, in order to become a midwife, do you have to like kids specifically? Is that a requirement that you like kids, or you don't have to like kids to become a midwife?
I would hope you would like kids, because you're going to be helping them. And I mean, like, if you don't like kids, that's something you need to work out, because that sounds like a personal problem. But you might want to like kids.
Right.
And I think that speaks to, like, like I said, asking yourself, like, why don't you like kids? Like,
right.
Like, not liking kid is not trendy. Like, why don't you like kids? And I'm not saying that to shame anybody, but like, what is it about children that you don't like? It doesn't mean that just because you don't want to have kids, you don't like kids. But if you just don't like kids, like, why?
Right. All right. So let's go back to you talk briefly about men and not wanting to share, or they choose to be manly and not share some of their emotions and not share some of their mental or emotional health with their family members. Why do you think that is? Why is it that men don't like to share their emotions and men don't like to share the mental health that they go through? Why is it that they don't like sharing that? Have you found anything in your research to indicate the reason why men just are reluctant in sharing that information?
I think it's not so much like a reason. It's more just the culture.
Right.
Like, the culture teaches men that being a man means to be aggressive, violent, strong, and emotionless, that emotions are only for women. Right. And so we all learn this throughout our cultures. really, and that's what it is. And so when a man feels vulnerable, they don't feel safe doing so because their whole life they've been told that they're not supposed to have these feelings.
Right.
And that they're not supposed to be weak and this, that, and the third.
Huh. All right. So, and then another thing that you talked about is that you said people like to do research. They want to know, okay, if they want to buy a car, they will do research about their car for several weeks. If they want a new phone, they will do research about their new phone, the color of the phone. Do they want an iPhone or do they want Android? They do research and they are well informed before they make that purchase or before they make that commitment. But the same doesn't happen when they are making a life decision of becoming a parent. Why is it that we don't put more emphasis in doing research on things that matter, but we do on the materialistic things? Is it because we don't have too much knowledge of it, or is it that the excitement is so much that you forget about the importance of it? Why is it?
I think that if more people could prepare for it, they would. I don't think that we're just like, we don't care. I think that we just don't talk about it. I think and we're not taught like, oh, there actually are things that you can do. Like, and even in the medical system, like there's not a lot of attention to preconception health and wellness either. Like they tell a woman to like get their tubes checked and take a vitamin and eat well. And that's it. They don't give you like actual guidance. Like the presentation I give to women, I talk about like, how do you actually take care of your reproductive system? Nobody goes over that with you, right? And so we've been living in a culture and a society that's like, you have a kid, you figure it out. Like, right? Instead of like, you can have a kid and have some stuff figured out. You know, some of us know that haven't had children that we wanted to get a job or like have a career or have a home or have these different things in place. And usually a lot of times you have those things in place and being a parent is still challenging, right? Regardless of how much money you have. And it's a little easier, or at least there's a little more room to breathe when you have, you know, a good job, right? When you have space for that child, when you have the means to provide for that child, right? Still challenging, still doesn't mean that you might not be tight on money, right? But there's a difference when you have certain stability versus not. Right. And I think even taking that a step further, like, well, what does it mean to be complete, as prepared as you can be, knowing that it's like you're preparing the conditions to be able to sustain difficulty. And so we don't give this importance because we just haven't been taught how to prioritize this. Right. We prioritize when the person already is pregnant and we scramble to get ready, but we don't prioritize the pre-planning piece.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Priorities. And the information you've talked about is amazing. Can you talk to us very briefly about nutrition? How important is nutrition for women? And also, I want to know, is having cravings for sweets, is that a thing for women that are pregnant, or do they just make it up to give us a hard time?
They're not making it up. Nutrition is very important during the pregnancy. During the pregnancy is important for women to focus on having a balanced diet, but a lot of the times that food pyramid that we've been so used to seeing doesn't necessarily always provide all of the nutrients that a woman needs. So like things that pregnancy needs to be supported is adequate amount of protein, because that builds the cells of the baby. And so you're basically building cell by cell these babies, and having enough protein is important so that protein doesn't get pulled from the mother's reserve and leave the mother depleted, right? And carbohydrates, which are in grains, vegetables, and fruit. And this actually speaks to what you were just saying about sugar. A lot of times we crave sugar because we're not having enough carbohydrates or enough protein. And so the body is asking for sugar because it needs this fuel to keep going. Instead of actually asking for the actual sugar, again, we've been taught if you crave sugar, take sugar, when really your body's asking for something that it needs, right? Because protein and carbohydrates become glucose, which is a form of sugar. And it's not a bad craving. It's just you're not reaching for the right thing because we have been taught not to. Fats, we've demonized fats, but we actually do need fats in our body because we need fat, like fatty acids, and there's some vitamins that are transported in the body in fat, right? So we think, oh, let me just stay away from fat, completely, but you actually need some of the ones that are very healthy, like coconut oil, olive oil, and like naturally occurring fats that you get from like eggs, nut, and seeds. The kind of oil that's not great for you is like having everything deep fried, right? And having no other access to any healthy version of fat. But fat is actually necessary. Another reason that fat is necessary is that it actually helps in regulating the temperature of the body, and it actually protects our organs, right? Some of the fat does that for our organs. So other things really, really quick that are necessary are foods that are high in iron for the formation of blood cells for the mom and the baby, calcium for the formation of the bones and the teeth, all of the B vitamins to help with the creation of and the support of hormones in the body, and vitamin C, because a woman's immune system tends to be a little bit depressed, like a little not working up to its full capacity during pregnancy. And so trying to keep her as healthy as possible and giving her a chance to have a strong immune system.
So you're saying that when a pregnant woman wants her sweets, it doesn't matter if it's in the middle of the night, you should get up and get it for them. That's what you're saying?
I don't know about I mean, I've seen it on TV, and if they're craving something, they should have it and be considerate that they're not, like, it doesn't mean like don't have sweets, period. But like every time you crave something sweet, you're eating like burgers and like candy. Like that might not be the best choice to take to make every single time. That whole middle of the night, I don't know, that's between you and your partner, but yeah.
All right. And then another thing that is exercising during pregnancy, a recommendation, and what kind of exercises are beneficial for the mother?
So exercise is recommended, but no like high impact exercise. I don't mean like you're going to start like lifting weights and running a treadmill and running a marathon, but like some movement in the form of walking, some prenatal yoga, dancing, anything that can work up a sweat for up to 30 minutes. Like you don't have to overexert yourself. And always definitely ask the healthcare provider. They'll give you more guidance about what kind of movements and things that you should stay away from. But at the very least, they should be walking every single day for like 30 minutes.
All right. Okay. So we talked about, pregnancy and then exercising during this experience. How does the man play a part in it, supporting the woman? And what are some of those things that a man should be doing for the woman when it comes to their health and the baby's health, outside of just the information that you shared about the men being healthy and taking care of themselves, taking care of their bodies, and also being willing to share some of the emotional and mental health that are going on, which also play a part into when you become a father. But what are some of the practical things that men can do during the pregnancy to assist the woman?
I think one big thing that comes to mind is to helping to think out some of the steps that need to be taken. And what I mean by that is, sitting down and thinking about what does the baby need, right? Like not leaving that to the mother, but like also thinking like, what do we need and what space do we have? So that's just like practically like something that the father should be involved in and not leave the mother to. Another thing I think is, although yes, I know that sometimes some partners might not be good at this, really checking in and asking about how she's feeling, and like even if it's just that you're listening and that's all you know how to do, because it can be a very lonely time to not have somebody really asking like, how are you feeling about the pregnancy and what's going on for you mentally and emotionally. If the partner has the capacity to do so, I think that would be important. I think it's also important, practically speaking, to ask about paternity leave, family leave at work, if you have that ability, if you have that kind of job, because learning that in advance could at least let you know how you can help plan for when she's recovering, right? And helping her think through like, who will she need to be at home with her when she's recovering from the birth, and making sure that like, if, you can cook and have stuff left in the fridge, right? Or like order food, like whatever that looks like, to really plan out making sure that she's not on her own by herself. You do have to go to work, and considering taking those weeks off, because as much as it's not about leaving her alone, it's also about the partner bonding with the baby. Like those first 6 weeks, you'll never get them back. So I recommend any man that has the ability to take off a couple weeks from work to do it, because it's, if you're trying to be the best father you can possibly be, you're going to miss out on having had that time when they're so little and you're still learning who they are and being able to bond. So those are some of the things that I could think off the top of my head as practical things that they could do.
Okay. And so now pregnancy, the practical things we can do, and then it's time to give birth. When the baby is about to come, how do you decide where to give birth, whether you can do it at home or the hospital or at a birthing center? How do you decide that? Or is that something that people think about?
Well, the way to decide it is to ask the mother where she wants to give birth.
Okay.
And then doing the research of what are the options that are available to her. Because in most places where we live, there are midwives, and then there always, of course, is a hospital. And it's really about where she feels comfortable and what she should, learn about and before making a decision. So there's that. What was the other part of your question? Sorry.
I was asking, the other part of the question is when do you decide that, and is it important to pick one or the other, and how do you decide that the one is better than the other?
So normally people decide how and when they want to give birth when they become pregnant. This is something obviously you can think about beforehand, but usually they decide when they're pregnant, and also if they have other health conditions that may make one choice safer than the other. And what I mean by that is, like, there are certain health conditions that make it safer to be at a hospital and may disqualify you from having a home birth. So usually for me, it really comes down to what kind of care you want and deciding from then. Like, do you want a provider that's going to listen to you, that's going to help you have the birth that you ideally would like? Right? It's really more of those questions than like which one is better. I personally, I'm biased. I say midwives are the way to go through and through because of the kind of care that we give. And, you might meet a midwife and you don't feel like you're connected or feel connected to them, but you feel like you meet an OB or GYN and you feel that way, right? So I can't say it was right or wrong with what's going on with Black women in hospitals and maternal mortality and morbidity. I'm always inclined to say to choose a midwife, and more importantly, choose a provider that you feel cares for you and will listen to you if you feel that something is wrong, or is invested in making sure that you get out of that pregnancy healthy and well, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Yeah, that's what I can say about that.
Okay. And you just mentioned about midwife again. Let me ask you this question. How do you, in like maybe 2-3 words, how do you select a good midwife? If you decide to go with a midwife, what are some of the questions that you would ask them to make sure that they are the right fit for you and the right fit for when the time comes, which is giving birth?
Wow, there's so many questions. And I think the main question would be like, ask them about like their philosophy, their birth philosophy. Ask them how they would handle an emergency. And I think other than that is really like feeling like, you feel good with them. Like there's that, and you feel listened to by them. I think that's the best that I can do. Also getting recommendations from other people that have probably worked with them and see if they come recommended. Right. I think is a really good measure of whether or not you might want to consider working with them.
Mm-hmm. You got to get that human connection after you talk to them.
Like there's a lot of times midwives will hear from other people because somebody that they know gave birth with them, and that's how they got right. And so I think it's important too to get that, get that perspective of other people that have maybe worked with that person and had a positive experience.
Okay. All right. So now it's time to give birth. Let's talk about C-section. How does the mother, the father prepare for this, both mentally, physically, and emotionally?
So a C-section is a cesarean section. It's an abdominal surgery, even though we talk about it like it's just a cut and that's it. It is abdominal surgery. In the event that there's something that's going on with the baby or the mom that makes it that the surgical delivery is the healthiest and safest way for them to both give birth. It usually happens in the OR. It's done by an obstetrician. And it takes a longer to recover from a cesarean section than from a natural vaginal birth. And to mentally prepare for it, I think is really doing research, as much research as possible. Also, like the knowledge that like giving birth via C-section is still giving birth. And I think some people really get caught up in like, oh, you didn't really give birth because you gave birth through C-section. And that's just not the case. And so like really like making sure to like check in with that belief so that it doesn't end up taking away from the birth experience, right? If there's an unexpected C-section, I think that before getting the C-section, this is important for the father as much as the mother, is asking questions why a C-section needs to happen, right? And really getting the research and getting the answers that you feel. Of course, if it's an emergency situation, there's no time for questions, it's different. But if there's time to ask questions about it, I think it's important to do that as well.
Okay. And all right, let me ask you this question then. After giving birth and everything went well, how many days do you stay in the hospital to ensure that everything is normal? That's if you decide to go to the hospital, but how many days should you stay in that bed? Is that a requirement, or do they just say, okay, here's your baby, have a great life?
No, usually you stay up to about 24 to 48 hours in the hospital. And that's just to monitor that, making sure that that the baby and the mother are transitioning from the birth well. And then they'll check, like, they'll check the baby, they'll check you, and then they discharge you to your home.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you briefly about the traumas that you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation about how they are intergenerational. Even though the things that you mentioned about slavery happening many, many years ago, you're saying that those traumas still exist today to fathers and mothers and we tend to see those traumas resurfacing when they become parents. Why is that? Why do they take so long, or why do they get passed down from generation to generation?
All right, so check it. So slavery was a quote unquote long time ago, right? In the history of the world, slavery was not that long ago. If you think about how many centuries we've been like in civilization, not just here in the United States, but like the world since humans began civilization, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, slavery was like yesterday. If you look at it in that scheme of things, right? If it's like including BC and AD, right? Slavery was the other day. The way that this trauma gets passed on is that first you were stolen from your homeland and like degraded, abused, tortured, violated, everything you could possibly think of and worse happened to Africans, right? And before that, indigenous people were getting killed and they were trying to commit genocide, right? So you have these two horrific things that are happening that completely threaten to destroy entire cultures and people, right? So the way that this gets passed on is that, so you have one generation that comes here as slaves, right? As enslaved people. And then that generation gives birth to another generation and they're still under the same conditions, right? So nothing has changed. The enslavement still is happening. So then this gets passed on from parent to parent because you're so traumatized and hurt that you can't be a best parent. You're in survival mode. So you may be abusing your children the same way you're being abused because you're so deeply destroyed mentally and emotionally from this horrific trauma. So that continues to get passed on in the way we unconsciously and consciously treat our children, right? Whether it's hitting our children, screaming at our children, and all of the other things that happen in families between men and women and mothers and grandmothers and all of that. So the thing about slavery is that even though it was a long time ago, after the enslavement ended, it didn't really end. It just changed, right? It became Jim Crow laws, making sure that Black people can't get or rise in life the way that they would like to. And then laws had to be passed for us to vote, right? So it wasn't like slavery ended and we were all just equal, right?
Right.
it became something else. And then like in the 14th Amendment, slavery is permissible in prisons. So that's why we have the prison system that we have, right? And we could go on and on and on. So even though, yes, like we weren't enslaved and being beaten and hit and all of these things by like slave masters, right? Our lives didn't necessarily improve that much. If you really think about it. Like, so you have Jim Crow laws, and then after Jim Crow laws, you have all of the amendments. And then to current day, like people, like police are still killing Black people with impunity.
Right.
You know, and we're still living in communities that are like willfully neglected, and like, you know, the minute that there's no white people in the community, like politicians stop caring for our basic human rights and all these different things. So all of this is trauma because you're experiencing your society deliberately try to minimize your quality of life. And when you're in survival mode, especially if you're thinking about living in the hood and like everybody's in survival mode, people can't get stability jobs, can't afford rent, your foundation is so shaken that you're not going to be your full and best self, right? If you're not getting adequate food, nutrition, healthcare and services, there's violence happening around your neighborhood, and you're still recovering from your childhood, right? From a parent that's also still recovering from their childhood, because we're living in trauma still. You're going to pass that on if you're not conscious of it. If there's people that think that it is okay to hit their children when they do something wrong, right? And I'm not going to sit here and debate with you or anybody whether it's right or wrong. It's wrong to hit somebody, to discipline them. Especially the way I put it is like, you wouldn't necessarily hit a grown adult at work for doing something that they weren't supposed to. Why would you hit a child with impunity, right? But that's a whole different subject. So even something that simple, right? If there are people in the world that still believe that it is okay to do that.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that is a reflection of trauma. Like to think that you should be able to hurt anyone, or even like still continue to pass on that men don't cry and pass that on to a little boy, knowing how much of an effect that can have on that person. That's trauma that you're passing on because you're doing what was done to you, especially if you're not examining it.
Wow. That is insane. All right. Let's talk about what is postpartum depression and how serious is it, and how can a man be of support to their spouse?
So postpartum depression affects many women. It is basically like feeling depressed, anxious, and a variety of different, not feeling mentally okay after giving birth. Some women do experience a little bit of sadness, but this is sadness that's like lingering, and depression that's lingering, like disinterest in what's going on around us, feeling like we don't find joy with the baby, and having very like scary thoughts and things of that nature. And the best way for their partner to support is to, you know, when they see that there might be a change in their partner, and they see that their partner is just more depressed than is healthy, right? That they're not just a little bit sad, but that they're like disconnected from themselves, not sleeping well. And obviously you're not going to sleep well when you have a newborn, but I'm talking about to the extreme, that this has gone on for more than a couple of weeks, and it's going on longer and longer. The way that you can support is talking to the partner unjudgmentally about how they feel, and that they're not supposed to put on a happy face because it is hard to become a parent. And then also supporting them and seeking mental health services if they can and want and need them, but really helping them to see, like, I see that you're not completely okay. Let's get some help for you and for the baby.
So when it gets to a point where it's dysfunctional and they're not being themselves, that's when you decide that's when it's important to start having that conversations and start looking at resources to reach out to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I have another question for you before we get to close to wrapping up the conversation. What can a new father expect to becoming a father? Any shock, or what are some of the things that a young father should be ready for when the moments get here? And the same applies to the women as well.
Well, I mean, shock might be one of them because, you know, it's a big change in life. I think expecting that getting the regular amount of sleep is not going to happen right away, and being patient with that process. They can expect a shift of attention from them to the baby, from their partner, and possibly have some feelings of like jealousy. That is a thing that some men do experience. They can expect to feel unsure and confused about what to do and not know what to do. And they can expect that their partner is going to need help. And that they're not gonna, and also like as much as you learn about it, there's always still gonna be a moment that you're gonna feel like, why didn't anyone tell me about this or tell me about that, right? And also if the person is in a relationship with the mother, also recognizing that the relationship is gonna change, right? It's gonna, like, you're gonna really learn who somebody is by parenting with them. And, like to prepare beforehand about talking about what is your parenting philosophy and principles and values. So that it doesn't come off as that much of a shock. And also like to be like straight up and just plain, like the sex life is going to change, right? And being cognizant of that and learning different ways to stay connected to your partner and learning what the new normal is for the relationship.
Wow. All right. Since you were talking, I just have another question. Is it possible that when the baby gets here, the love that I used to give to my wife, the attention could be shifted to the baby? And is there a potential that the wife would be jealous of the baby, like you're just mentioning?
I don't know. I haven't heard that specifically, but anything's possible.
Okay. All right. Anything else that we haven't talked about that you think is important for somebody who is preparing to become a new parent?
I think I've said as much as I possibly can about what someone can do to prepare.
All right. Do you have any specific resources, including your website, that people can find information about any of the things that we've talked about today?
Yeah, sure. So like you mentioned, my website is thesewatersrundeep.com, and I have information and articles and blogs that I've written on about the variety of subjects on there. On my IG, I tend to post information and local resources as well. My IG, which you can share. It can also link you to other Instagram pages that I follow that have that information. In terms of books, there are a couple of books that might be useful for a man to read. There's or for the woman, there's like this book called Real Food and Pregnancy, which talks about like nutritionally what a woman should eat, and also like probably this, if your partner is eating healthy, you probably want to know, what they're eating as well, right? And eat right along with them healthily. So create an environment in the home of healthy eating. There's this one particular book that I think is really good. It's the Complete Book of Pregnancy and Childbirth. That's a really good book to look at, especially if they're specifically planning on these things. The hospital might be a good place, depending if they have information up to get information about this. I think that's what I could say, like off the top of my head, of just things that could be shared between partners to be able to cultivate a healthy pregnancy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Carmen. The information is invaluable, and I know that I'm going to re-listen to this podcast as me and my wife started talking about the information that you just shared here. I'm gonna re-listen to this, and I'm even gonna encourage my wife to also take a listen and learn about all the resources that you've mentioned here. Again, your website is thesewatersrundeep.com. It's thesewatersrundeep.com. And your Instagram page, where people can also look up resources when they go on that page, is semidiosa.negra. That is your Instagram page. And I would also tag this in the description of this episode. Is there anything else, last minute things you want to say before we conclude?
No, just, buckle up for the journey, enjoy it. And, let's not do what you got to do to prioritize and plan, and, take it with joy and with fun. Don't take it so serious. Don't take yourself so seriously. Allow yourself to learn from every part of this journey.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There you have it, everybody. If you're listening to this still, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for listening through and through. Make sure if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button so you can get this automatically downloaded the next time new episodes come out. We have a lot more experiences and stories to tell, and I cannot wait to share them with you. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Reviews are always appreciated. Thank you. I appreciate you, and let me know what you think on our Instagram at Verdad Duele Pod. Our team is here to serve you. We look forward to hearing about your successes, and maybe one day we may invite you to the studio to share. We wish you luck. The Verdad Duele family has your back. Thank you so much.